So 2025 went out with more of a whimper than it did a bang, but I am here to wrap us up regardless, talking about these 7 books that I read in December and the 8th that I tried to finish before the end of the year, but I did not quite make it. So December turned out to be quite an underwhelming month for reading overall. It started really strong. I was doing so well throughout the first 2/3 of the month, but then my Christmas break hit and I thought, you know what, I'm going to spend all of my time cozied up and reading a book. But what I actually spent my time doing, and make no mistake, I do not regret this at all, I spent my time playing a lot of board games. I spent so many hours returning to Act 3 of Baldur's Gate, and you know, in the afternoons, every afternoon I picked up my book and I read a little chapter and then I promptly had a nap. It was glorious, and I'm actually coming out of hibernation right now just to bring you guys this video, but it does mean that December did not turn out to be the rip-roaring success that I anticipated based on my performance at the beginning of the month, and I actually didn't finish a single thing after I wrapped up episode 21 of Shelve It or Scrap It, so big whoops on my part. But getting into the statistics, you know what, looking at a month-by-month overview, December was not quite as tragic as I thought that it was, but it is my 4th worst reading month of the year. But like I said, I regret nothing. Wish I'd have got a couple more books in there, but hey ho. What can you do? So in total, I read 2,911 pages across 7 books, and that broke down to an average of 94 pages per day. For the star ratings, I had 1 2-star read, 2 3 stars, 3 4 stars, and 1 5 star, getting a last minute favourite in at the 11th hour. This broke down to an average of 3.6 stars per book. For the demographics, I read 1 middle grade book, 3 young adult, and 3 adult. For the formats, it was a Kindle heavy month for me. I read 5 ebooks and 2 standardly formatted novels. For the genres, we were all over the place. I had 2 fantasy, 1 contemporary, 1 fantasy romance, 1 mystery, 1 paranormal, and 1 romance book. And finally, for the places where I sourced these books from, 5 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2025. 1 of them I received from the publisher, and 1 is a book that I had hauled in 2025. The first book that I read was unfortunately a little bit of a disappointment, and that was Graceling by Kristen Kashaw. And I did sadly have some high expectations of this because I know it is a young adult fantasy staple. I did not hate this book, but I did not love it either. So this one is set in a world where people have graces, which means that they have things that they are especially talented at, and our main character's grace is killing. And right at the start of this book, she rescues the grandfather of a different kingdom to the one that she's from. She's like the niece of the king, I think, and she rescues the grandfather of another kingdom, and then she spends the rest of the book teamed up with his grandson trying to find out why he was kidnapped and who is responsible. So it is a little bit different than I anticipated, because I thought they were on the hunt for the grandfather, but the grandfather is now safe at home and they need to figure out why he was taken in the first place. So I knew that the different books in this series followed different characters, but what I don't think I realized is how isolated the plot lines are in these. We are following Katza in this first book as she goes on this mission, learns more about her grace, develops it, and kind of comes to terms with it because she has a lot of shame around the fact that her grace is to take life away. And we do meet one of the characters of, I think, the 3rd book in the series in this one, who is Bitter Blue, but I'm pretty sure that the sequel to this, Fire, takes place in a different kingdom following a different character. Now, my issue with this book is not that it was bad. I didn't love the writing style. I thought that it was a little bit abrupt, a little bit matter of fact. We had a lot of short, sharp sentences, and I prefer my books to be a little bit more detailed and a little bit more descriptive within the writing. And the isolated plotline of this one is also something that didn't particularly engage me, because I do prefer my fantasy to be on the epic side with a lot of interconnecting points and intricacy within the plot. So this reminded me a lot of the Poison series, or the Study series I think it's called, which I liked the first book of, and I didn't like books 2 and 3, so I've now DNF'd that series. But these are 2 series that I do associate in my mind as well as being published at a similar time, and I would say that they are a similar kind of fantasy with a similar writing style. So if you like one, I do think that it's very possible that you would like the other. Something that I find interesting about both of these series is that they have a lot of common themes and tropes that we now very frequently see in romantasy and also in the popular young adult fantasy of like the last decade. And it's very clear that these books were building blocks for the genre that then exploded. Essentially, these books walked so that things like the Grisha trilogy and Red Queen and Akatar could run. However, because the genre has expanded so much from the time that these were published, and because I now expect a little bit more from my fantasy than these books provided, but I think as well, if you like quest-based stories with a self-contained plot, like Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher or Sorcery and Small Magics by Mega Ducey, where you just have a character kind of following a quest line, that you will enjoy this one. I did also like the romance. I'm not head over heels for it or anything, but I did enjoy it. And in the vlog where I read this one, I believe I said that because I already own book 2, I may continue on with this series eventually and like see what I think of book 2 before I decide if I want to continue. Now that I've sat on this for pretty much a month, I don't think I have any interest in continuing on with this series. I'm hoping to go into 2026 with a lot more intentionality in my reading, a lot more thoughtfulness, and also picking books that I'm a lot more enthusiastic about than I feel I have in the past. And so I feel like I should just unhaul book 2 along with book 1 and cut my losses with this one. It was nice to see the origins of some of the things that I love in fantasy, but this was a 3-star read for me that I'm not especially enthusiastic to continue on with. The next book that I read is a little bit of a classic or a staple author for a different genre, and that was Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren, and I really enjoyed this one. I've been wanting to read from Christina Lauren for a while. I know that they are a well-loved writing duo within the genre, so I've been wanting to try them out for myself, and I also got a box set of I think 4 or 5 of their books that I've been kind of waiting to dive into, and I'm glad that this is the one that I started with. So this is a second chance romance following childhood friends. Essentially, the main character's mother died when she was a child, and her father bought this holiday home where they go to for a lot of weekends and also pretty much every school break. And when they move into the house, the main character finds the boy who lives next door curled up in the closet of her bedroom reading his book. So her father turns this into a library for her, and over the years, I think this starts maybe when they're around 13, and then something happens when I think they're 18 and they don't see each other for a long time, and then it's around I think 10 years later that the main character meets this guy again. But they become fast friends, spending all of their weekends and all of their breaks together in this library. A friendship starts and blossoms very quickly, which evolves into something a little bit more as they grow older. However, like I said, something breaks them apart. They don't see each other for 10 years. Our main character is in this relationship that is very safe, it's very financially secure, but it's not especially passionate, and she doesn't have any particularly strong feelings for this man, but she appreciates this kind of safe life that it's going to afford when she marries him. And lo and behold, one day when she's meeting with a friend, she sees this guy, her long lost love Elliot, in a coffee shop, and he is immediately desperate to be back in her life. So she has to decide whether she would rather have this more passionate relationship that comes with very scary, very big feelings, or whether she would like a safer, more comfortable life with somebody who does not quite have as much capacity to hurt her. So this is a book that deals heavily with grief throughout the entirety of this novel. Macy is obviously dealing with the loss of her mother, which I think happens a couple of years before the start of this book, but as a young woman growing up and experiencing puberty and also navigating friendships and drama at school and also her first romantic relationships, obviously that is something that a girl appreciates having a mother for, to help her navigate these big moments in her life. So her mother's loss really permeates this novel. But then we also find out when Elliot and Macy reconnect right at the beginning of this book that in the years that they've been apart, Macy's father has also passed. And then we also have this big cataclysmic event that happened when they were 18 that has caused a 10-year separation where they've had absolutely no contact, and the mystery of that is kind of what really drives us through the book. I really liked this because it reminded me of books by other authors that I've really loved. I was a big Sarah Dessen fan when I was a teenager, and this kind of felt like a grown-up version of that, but it also reminded me of like older Colleen Hoover books that I read and really enjoyed, and the kind of romance authors that also have a strong contemporary plot line that deals with a lot of emotion. I do read romance. I don't read the most romance, but I do like my contemporary romance stories, and I do find that some romance is written for the sake of romance, which is fine if that is what you are going into the genre for, and it is of course the romance genre. However, I personally like something a little bit extra going on outside of the romance, something that really heightens the emotions that you feel when you're reading and also gives the characters extra room to grow, extra opportunity to find common ground, work through some shit and come together. And I feel like books like this really deliver that for me, which forms me to have a stronger connection to them. And I do find that my emotional response is incredibly important when it comes to romance. The only thing that I actually did not love about this is the fact that we follow two timelines, and that is not a bad thing, but we follow Elliot and Macy when they meet up until them turning 18 and like being separated for 10 years, and we also follow them reconnecting in the present timeline. Now this is of course an adult romance, and I definitely appreciate that we got that earlier timeline, because something that I really hate is when we see a relationship that has already developed and we haven't seen that, and then we're expected to believe in it. Like, I need to see the development of the relationship to root for it. So I really appreciate that that was included, but at the current stage that I am in my life, there was something a little bit icky reading about horny teenagers as these two are growing their friendship into a romantic relationship in the past timeline. But I gave this 4 stars, and I'm eager to read from Christina Lauren again in the future. Next up, I read a middle grade, and it was my only middle grade read of the year, but it was very seasonally appropriate, and that was Winter House by Ben Gutterson. So this is following a girl who is an orphan. She lives with her aunt and uncle. They are very poor, but in a very kind of like mean, stingy, miserly way, and they've abandoned her for Christmas. They have gone on a holiday and they're sending her off to this hotel. Now the main character is really dreading this, because anywhere that her aunt and uncle are sending her has to be awful, because they would not spend a penny on her by their own choice. So she arrives at Winter House and she finds that it's this like magical winter hideaway where there's so many cool people there. The hotel itself is really interesting and is shrouded in mystery, and she's very confused as to how she's ended up here based on the fact that her aunt and uncle have sent her to this place, and it's actually like a nice place to be. But when she gets there, she very quickly becomes entrenched in the mysteries of Winter House, where there is a painting on the wall that has a cipher included in it, and she also finds a book that's going to lead her to uncover the secrets of Winter House. Now it was really interesting reading these two back to back, because while they're very different genres, both of them include a male and female character that are obsessed with books, language and words. So in a lot of ways this kind of felt like an early prequel with the two. Obviously this is just like a children's friendship story, but with two characters who keep coming together and being enthusiastic about words. It was really fun to read these two back to back. And the thing that I loved about Winter House, and I also really love about the middle grade that I do enjoy, is that I feel like the middle grade genre always introduces you to this, when it's fantasy, should I say, it introduces you to this really cool concept or really cool place, and you have the time and the freedom to explore that within the book and the series. So in this case, we're exploring the hotel, Winter House. In like Nevermore by Jessica Townsend, we're exploring this city or town, I think, of Nevermore, and also the Wondrous Society. And I think that sometimes in adult fantasy we kind of get to the plot a little bit too quick, that we don't get to spend as much time immersed in this cool concept as we do in something like middle grade, and Winter House was no exception. Every time I think of this book I crave nougat, because there is a dessert that is produced by this hotel that actually is described as Turkish delight in this book, but the way that it was described to me immediately reminded me of nougat, so much so that I had to go out and buy some. And now every time I pick up this book and think about it and talk about it, I have a craving for nougat. It's driving me crazy, but luckily I still have some, so I'm going to indulge in that when we finish this video. Something that I really liked about this book as well is that it kept you guessing. As an adult reading a middle grade story, there are definitely some parts of this that I realized for myself quite quickly, such as our main character's attachment to the hotel and why it was that she'd been sent there. But the core mystery, like the cipher, even though you are given something that's really cool about this actually, is that you are given the cipher in the book. So throughout the course of this, you're looking for the keyword. The main characters are trying to figure out what the keyword is so that they can solve the cipher. But Ben Gutterson also gives you the opportunity to solve it for yourself by providing all of the tools that you need. And I thought that that was a really fun interactive experience while we were going through this series. So I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. At this point, I'm not sure whether I'll continue on with the series. I feel like middle grade does replace cozy fantasy for me, and I get the same things out of middle grade that other people potentially get out of cozy fantasy, like a relatively like safe space, a heartwarming, comforting story with a really cool concept or location. So I may continue on with this series in the future. I haven't decided, but I was very impressed with the first installment. Next, I picked up a young adult book that's been on my shelves for quite some time, which is The Weight of the Stars by Kay Ancrum. I picked this one up a few years ago after I read and really enjoyed The Wicker King, and I'm sad to say that it's languished on my shelf since then, because this is set in the same town as The Wicker King, and we have some recurring characters in the background of this story, but it's not necessarily connected. You don't have to read them back to back. I do, however, wish that I had looked up how the two books are connected, because that went right over my head because it's been so long since I read The Wicker King. It's not really a spoiler, so if you guys are wanting to read this and it's been a while since you've read The Wicker King, then I would just recommend looking it up so that you get to appreciate that content within here, because like I said, I completely missed it. But this one I thought was a sci-fi, I'll be honest, and that's been happening to me a lot recently. But essentially The Wicker King is a contemporary story that has a bit of an ambiguous fantastical element, and so I expected The Weight of the Stars to be similar in that regard, but this is just straight up a young adult contemporary. We are following two girls in here. One's mother worked for NASA, however both of her parents have died and she has been left to raise her brother, who's just a couple of years younger than her, by herself on a trailer park. And because of this responsibility, she has pretty much given up on her dreams of being involved in NASA herself and also space exploration. Our second character in here is a new girl who's just moved to this town, and her mother was sent on a one-way trip to space when she was a teenager. So essentially her mother got pregnant accidentally during the time that she was being trained to go into space. So they took the baby and somebody from the company raised the baby while her mother went off on this mission. So this character sits on the roof of her house every night trying to catch radio signals from her mother's ship just so that she knows that her mother's alive. So Ryan, who is the character whose mother worked for NASA, is known at school for taking in waifs and strays. So people who are going through a little bit of a hard time, she kind of brings them into the fold and offers them support. There is like a big found family within this book, and her teacher asks her to do this for the new girl. So in the process of trying to gain this girl's trust, they actually startle her when she's out on the roof and she falls out and she's gravely injured. So Ryan talks to this girl's father, who tells her what she's been doing on the roof, and Ryan steps in to start to intercept those signals so that she doesn't miss anything while she's in the hospital. And they start to grow closer when the girl is out of hospital, and they start to do this together. So this, for all intents and purposes, is a pretty standard young adult contemporary. I do really like Kay Ancrum's concepts, and I like her kind of unique way of storytelling. There's always something just a little bit visually interesting about her books. And the interesting thing about this one is that each chapter is titled with like how long it takes place after the chapter before it. So we follow this pretty much in very small increments, mainly following the character of Ryan. Now we do have a very rich tapestry of supporting side characters in this book, and I think that Kay Ancrum has a particular talent for making a three-dimensional fleshed out cast of side characters without us ever really following them or really delving into the things that they're going through. It's like we're very aware that they have their own problems. They're not just two-dimensional characters there to fill space. They feel like real and fully fleshed out without us ever having to really explore them in any depth and detail. But because I'm not somebody who reads young adult contemporary very much anymore, this felt like a very 3-star read for me. It was a very quick read, it was very easy, but it wasn't especially engaging me up until the end. I think that the way this book ended was perfect, and there's a certain part of this story that I love the way that Kay Ancrum told it, once again in a visually interesting and unique way, which essentially sealed the deal on this book for me. So it's a very low 4-star. I'm not a young adult contemporary reader anymore, but if you are a young adult contemporary reader, I think that you should definitely give Kay Ancrum a try, because I've really enjoyed both books that I've read from them. The biggest disappointment of the month was this Wicked Fate by Kaylin Bayron, and this was especially upsetting because the first book in this duology was one of my biggest surprises of the year. This is the sequel to The Poison Heart, I think. Yes, This Poison Heart? The Poison Heart. This Poison Heart. Sorry, I'm squinting at my unhaul pile, which is where both of these books are being sent to, because this was just not it. So This Poison Heart follows a girl who lives in Brooklyn with her mother's, and they run a flower shop, but obviously like the rent in Brooklyn, I imagine it's extortionate. So they're struggling a little bit, and the main character is adopted, and she's approached by somebody who is managing her aunt's estate, and she's never met this aunt, but she's told that her aunt has died and that she's left her this estate in her will. Now she has no idea what this estate is going to be, but they decide to go and explore it because life in Brooklyn, like, they're just kind of getting by, and this could mean anything for them. It could be nothing, it could be something. So they go up to New York State, where they find this big sprawling mansion that has an apothecary within it and a poison garden in the back. And our main character actually has an ability that has been causing her a little bit of trouble in Brooklyn because she has an affinity for plants. They grow towards her, she can help them flourish, she can kill them, and she's also immune to poisons. So she really thrives in this small town where she doesn't have as many people watching her, so if her emotions get out of control and the plants react wildly, there's a lot less chance anybody's going to see her. But as she continues to explore this town and cultivate this poison garden, she learns that this garden performs a very important role in the community, and she also is now the caretaker of something that is coveted by some bad people who are going to try and claim it for themselves. So the thing that I really loved about book one is that it felt like a contemporary fantasy in the style that I love, albeit a little bit more fantastical. It had almost like suspense or thriller elements, as our main character is kind of being hunted down by these people who want to claim what she has for themselves. And it was also just like a whole lot of fun with that slight fantastical element. And there was definitely things that I didn't like about it, but overall I was very pleasantly surprised. We also had an element of Greek myth introduced to the story, which I thought really worked in book one. However, book two really ramped up those fantastical elements, and I just don't think that two short installments of a duology were enough to develop this story in a way that made sense, given that the tone of the first book was very much rooted in this contemporary fantasy element. Like, the main character had an affinity for plants, and she had some like family ties to Greek mythology, but that is about it. Now in book two, we had Greek gods popping up left, right and center. We had a bunch of characters who turned up right at the end of book one, taking over the plot for like the first half of book two, and our main character was essentially swept on this grand fantastical adventure that she played very little part in herself, and it felt just like so out of place in conjunction with book one and like a completely different story and series altogether. It lost everything that I enjoyed about book one, and it was a chaotic mess in my opinion. I have very generously given this 2 stars. I feel like it should be a 1 if I'm being honest, because like I said, it carried over pretty much nothing that I enjoyed about the first book while still carrying the criticisms that I had, which is that the dialogue is cheesy in parts, and that some of the side characters in here, especially like the main character's parents, don't feel like fully fleshed out individuals. They feel like cheesy caricatures of people. So I'm very disappointed because like I said, I really loved book one, and I kind of expected book one to be this, which I feel like made it even more disappointing when this is how the second book turned out. So yeah, this was probably one of the only series that I've actually managed to finish this year, and it was a disappointment. But following that, we did manage to get a final 5-star read into 2025. It's only my 7th 5-star of the year, and that was Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry. So I'd heard really good things about this, so I was optimistic going into it, and I was looking for a romantasy to recommend specifically for my recommendations video I put out right at the end of the year. But man, did this deliver. I wasn't expecting a 5-star read because I just never do these days, and that's why I want to go into 2026 with more intentionality and purpose to try and enjoy myself a little bit more. But yeah, what a way to end the year. I only finished one more book after this, which was disappointing, but we'll get to that in a minute. So Shield of Sparrows is Devney Perry's first foray into romantasy. She is a contemporary author. I think that she does predominantly write romance, but with elements of things like suspense, but this is her first fantastical book. So I didn't really know what to expect from that. I haven't had great success with authors transitioning from indie contemporary romance into fantasy romance, or whilst I've enjoyed the book a lot, I also see a lot of flaws in it, like with, for example, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. But this one, I think, excelled at capturing the essence of what people love about romantasy while not completely copying and pasting books by other authors. So this one is following a princess, and her younger sister has been selected by and trained by her father to fulfill a role in a treaty called the Shield of Sparrows. Now, the interesting thing about this world is that there are monsters within it. There are regular animals animals as well, but there are also monsters, and every generation there is a migration of this giant eagle type monster called a crux that decimates the land. And so the Shield of Sparrows was born to create alliances between all of the kingdoms of the world so that they weren't preoccupied fighting each other whilst also trying to survive the crux. So to seal this treaty, every generation a prince and princess of the realm are married together to retighten obviously the bonds of alliance, and our main character's younger sister is supposed to fulfill this role. However, her father is hoping to speed up this marriage for his own purposes, so he invites the prince of this kingdom that his younger daughter is supposed to marry into, as well as a delegation of monster hunters to kill some monsters that have been plaguing the seas and to kind of feel out who the daughter is going to be marrying before the marriage. However, when this delegation turns up, they actually present a loophole to the king where, because they have killed 7 female monsters, which in the lore of this world theoretically means that they have killed enough monsters to disrupt the reproductive chain and therefore stop the problem of these specific monsters harassing the shores and the ships of this kingdom, that means that they can choose their own bride prize, and they decide to choose the main character as opposed to her younger sister. So the main character is obviously shocked by this, and she's also been low-key neglected by her father because her sister was a better candidate for this role. So she hasn't been trained, she hasn't been prepared, she hasn't been politically advised, and her father pulls her aside and tells her that he would like her to slip into this kingdom under the guise of marrying the prince, report back and tell him how he can infiltrate this kingdom, and also, if she gets a chance, to kill the legendary monster hunter, who I'm pretty sure, yeah, he's called the Guardian, who has come with the prince to escort them back. So she reluctantly agrees to do this. However, as she is traveling back to her new kingdom, she finds out that it's a kingdom shrouded in secrets and that the prince and the Guardian obviously don't trust her, so they're not willing to impart any of the wisdom of this world so she can report it back to her father. But she also, quite worryingly for her, finds herself drawn to the Guardian more than she is drawn to her new husband, who seemingly doesn't really want to spend any time with her. So this is not quite an enemies to lovers story. They are kind of on opposing sides, although it is under the guise of an alliance because she has been sent on this mission by her father to betray them and they don't trust her, but technically they should be allies. I feel like it's so hard for me these days to find a romantasy where I actually root for the relationship and I'm really invested in the romance, and this definitely delivered on that. It's a slow burn, which is always a hit with me. I think pretty much for the first 2/3 of this book, nothing at all really develops romantically, which I loved, and that is something that I feel massively contributes to my engagement with the romantasy genre over the last few years, because I much prefer to wait for any kind of romantic content in a book as opposed to having it develop quite early on. And Daphne Perry writes the kind of sexual tension that had me kicking my feet with butterflies when the main characters are just in the same room together, which I love. That's a feeling that I've missed for a very long time. But what I love even more than a romantasy with a great romance is a romantasy that also has a great plot. There were multiple plot twists in this that I did not see coming, because straight away in this book we have questions about the monsters, we have questions about the migration, and as our main character journeys to this new kingdom, she finds that there is more going on with the monsters than she ever knew or anticipated, which she finds out the country that she's moving to are particularly suffering because of these developments with the monsters. But we also have something going on with the main character. It's very heavily alluded to that something is a little bit odd with her, a little bit odd with her parentage. She doesn't really know much about her mother at all, and there's things about herself that she can't really explain that's kind of swept under the rug, but is very much like something we're aware of that does start to develop later in this book that I did not see coming. And the way that this book ended honestly just took me by surprise, which I do feel is very hard to do these days. So I feel like the strength in this book is that Daphne Perry does combine those things that we know and love about the genre: a hate to love, reluctant allies kind of romance, a good slow burn, good sexual tension, a princess who is the unfavored princess, the one that her father loves the least. A lot of the setup of this is very like The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen, where we have a princess who is sent to infiltrate a kingdom through a marriage that's supposed to be an alliance, but it ends up being a forced marriage where the main character eventually starts to sympathize with the people of the country that she's sent to. And then we have the monsters, which felt kind of reminiscent to Horizon Zero Dawn for me. Very different kinds of monsters, but we have the sense that they don't quite belong in this world. They're very similar to real world animals, and there are real animals in this world as well, but they also have something a little bit extra going on. on. And then we also had all of these really great plot twists that took me by surprise. So I feel like Devney Perry has done something that is well known and well loved, but put just a little bit of a spin on it that makes it unique and something new, and not just, like I said, a copy and paste of what has come before it. So if you want to see me enthuse about this some more, definitely check out that recommendations video. But this is a 5-star read for me, and you're definitely going to see it again in my best books of the year. And then finally, the last book that I finished in 2025, which was unfortunately a little bit of a disappointment. There were things that I liked about it, but things that I didn't, was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This one is especially disappointing to me just because I've had this book on the back burner for so long, thinking that I'm going to love it so much and not really being prepared to actually experience it, if that makes any sense. It's a rainy day book, a book that I'm saving for a rainy day. But Shelve It or Scrap It forced me to pick this one up, which I am glad about. It was just very different than I expected it to be based on what I've read from Leigh Bardugo before, and that is not to say that I expected it to be exactly like what I've read from Leigh Bardugo before, but I feel like I had a good sense of her writing style. She does write stories that are a little bit dark, they deal with darker topics, but she has previously only written in the young adult space before she published Ninth House, and I always felt like she had a very distinct writing style that was not incredibly descriptive, but I do feel like it lent itself well to a really great, like, rich atmosphere, where the narrative of Ninth House I felt was very like stark and cold and matter of fact, and I feel like that was the biggest disconnect for me with this book. So I've been excited about this one for a long time. I knew that it was a paranormal story, and paranormal doesn't always work for me, but we're following a girl called Alex Stern who can see ghosts, and because of this ability she is headhunted for the 9th Secret Society of Yale. So the other 8 secret societies all dabble in the occult, and the 9th Secret Society was created to police the rest of them. Now our main character is a high school dropout. She doesn't have any kind of like background in education. She's had been in trouble with the police because of something that happened to her when she was a child. It's kind of set her on this path of self-destruction where she's ended up in a place where she can't really get herself out of the hole that she's dug because of the trauma that she's experienced. And so essentially this free ride through Yale is a second chance for her, and then she just has to use her ability to see ghosts in conjunction with police in these secret societies. So she jumps on this, but very quickly within a couple of months her mentor Darlington disappears and nobody knows where he is. Is he alive? Is he dead? We actually dance around the topic for a lot of this book. So that kind of leaves her in charge with the running of Ninth House, which she feels very underqualified to do. And one day a girl is murdered, and she is from the town, but her life and the way that she's described reminds her a lot of Alex, who in her past as well, actually her friend died, and we know that it was under kind of suspicious circumstances, but we don't really get a full picture of Alex's life up until her arriving at Yale for a lot of this book. But something about this girl who dies reminds her of her past and also her friend. So she takes it upon herself to investigate this murder, even though everyone is telling her that it's none of her business because it is nothing to do with the secret societies of Yale. And spoiler alert, it is to do with the secret societies of Yale, which is how everything's kind of connected. The writing style was my biggest issue with this because I just wasn't expecting the level of detachment that we had throughout this book and how plain and matter of fact the writing was going to be. It does make perfect sense though, because the kind of character that Alex is, who has gone through so much, I think she's like around 20, but having gone through so much in her life at only 20 years of age, it makes perfect sense that she would have a sense of detachment. That she's the kind of person who can describe like horrific trauma, things that people shy away from, in a like matter of fact way, and that really presents itself and shows itself in the writing, which this book is predominantly from Alex's perspective. We do have a little bit of a dual timeline because for a little while we're following Alex in present day, but we're also skipping back to last fall, which is from Darlington's perspective, as we follow what happened to him and how he disappeared. And then we do eventually kind of keep skipping back to the spring before Alex went to Yale, and also points further back in her life to get a full picture of her backstory. But the second thing that I wasn't expecting from this book is that the style of it is the style of a paranormal detective novel. So I was expecting this, like I said, having read from Leigh Bardugo before, to skew along the contemporary fantasy genre. The writing style I expected to be kind of similar tonally to what I'd read from her before, but on this kind of dark academia landscape with some magical like occult activities going on with these secret societies. But this reads very much in the style of a paranormal detective novel, which is not my favorite genre. But like with when I read Terror at the Gates, by Scarlett St. Clair, which I think is like an urban fantasy or paranormal romance blended with the more modern aspects of the romantasy genre that we see today. I feel like this presented a paranormal detective novel blended with some other stuff that I enjoyed a little bit more. I do still really like Leigh Bardugo's writing, and I liked the discussion of privilege in here, because the overarching theme of this book is that people who are in power will always take advantage of people who are not. They will always prey on people weaker than them. They will always try and get away with whatever it is that they're trying to achieve at the expense of poorer, weaker, more vulnerable people. And I really enjoyed the way that that was discussed and explored in here with, like I said when I read it, not necessarily subtlety in that it's hard to find out what this book is about. Like, the message is clear, but it's not consistently spoon-fed to you if we compare this to something like Babel by R.F. Kuang, where the message is like smacking you in the face every 10 seconds. This makes it clear what the message is without holding your hand, looking deep into your eyes and explaining to you word for word what Leigh Bardugo is trying to say. And I really appreciated how we had that represented on different facets. We had like obviously the clear divide between the rich and the poor when we're somewhere like Yale, which is an Ivy League university that churns out a ton of like rich and powerful people. We also had white privilege and how throughout the years, and also still to some degree today, white people have power over people of color. We had like gender imbalances, how men often have power over women, and sexual assault is something that is graphically depicted on page in this book, so do be warned of that. It is something that forms a very central theme, once again running throughout this entire book, but the most graphic depiction of it in here is a sexual assault against a child. So I do feel like that is important to know going in so you can prepare yourself for that. It was something that was talked about a lot when this book was released that I'd kind of forgotten about when I got back into this. But actually, you know, I gave this book 3 stars because it isn't my kind of book. Paranormal detective story with a murder mystery is not the kind of thing that I would typically read. And the one thing that I actually can say about this that is a genuine negative as opposed to just a difference between my personal taste and what this book actually was, is that when we were solving this mystery at multiple junctions throughout this book, we found the person who was responsible, only to find out that like, oh no, wait, it's actually this person. No, it's just this person. And I think that this book did go on for 50 pages too long, and we had 2 extra villain monologues in here. One came out of absolutely nowhere and I feel like was just shoehorned right in at the end to wrap up this secondary mystery that I wish we'd have kind of left to lead into the second book and involved it there, as opposed to trying to like really quickly wrap it up in a way that didn't feel plausible. But aside from that, I would say that talking about this book now, I had an overwhelmingly positive experience with it looking back, even though I didn't love it. And I think that is because of how many layers there are to this book and how thought-provoking it was. And while it wasn't necessarily to my personal tastes, I think that there was a lot in here to discuss and that was executed really well. And I do actually think that Leigh Bardugo is, in my experience of what I've read in the past, is one of the most successful cases of a young adult author making the jump to adult in a way where there is a marked difference between their young adult work and their adult work in the level of complexity of not the fantasy in terms of like epic plot twist, but of the text and like the nuance and the writing. And I think that this book deserves its flowers for that, if nothing else. And then the book that I tried to finish before the end of the year, I started this I think on the 22nd. It was the Monday of Christmas week, and I spent my entire Christmas break reading this book. Now I will say the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, very busy days, not a lot of reading done. Between the 25th and the, like, shall we say the 28th, very sleepy times. And then I eventually started to make a decent effort in getting through this book, and I made it to page 535 of The Light of All That Falls by James Islington. So this, I really wanted to get this in by the end of the year, but I just had to film this video, so I couldn't even read this for the first couple of days of the year and then bring this video a little bit later and say that I finished it or count it for 2025. It would have been great as well, because then I would have finished an extra series and a chunky adult epic fantasy series before the end of the year. But alas, this is instead going to be my first book of January because I still have almost 300 pages left of it. I had a rough time. Obviously you'll hear about this more in the vlog, the upcoming vlog that I made over the festive period, and also of course my January wrap up. But I did have a really hard time with the first 30% of this book, and since then it's picked up and I'm enjoying it a lot more. So it took me a long time to get through that first section, but since I made it to 30%, I've been a little bit more enthusiastic about continuing, and I'm very excited to see how this series wraps up before I move on to my next reread and resume series, which in case you missed it, I did pick that using a spinner wheel in my January TBR, which is going to be the Mirror Realm cycle by Ariel Kaplan, which I'm also really excited about. So this will be my first book of the year, and then we'll see where I go from there, because I asked in my TBR video for you guys to decide whether you wanted like a Patreon pick vlog or whether you wanted an ARC vlog for my first vlog that I was filming of the year, and the results were very mixed. So I think I'm just going to do like a combination of book club books and Patreon picks before I go into my next episode of Shelve It or Scrap It, which is going to be a fun one. I'm excited to see what I'm going to be reading for that. But here are all of the books that I read in December, my final wrap up of 2025. Not quite as many as I expected to read, but I did get something off my TBR that's been there for a number of years that I've been scared to read. I found a new favorite. I cleared something off my shelves that's been there for ages that I now know is not for me. So successful overall, I would say. Let me know down in the comments what your last read of 2025 was. What did you end the year on, and was it a bang or a whimper? I love how I'm quoting a poem that I only know because of Twilight multiple times in this video, but let me know down below. And if you guys would like to let me know you were here, if you don't feel like you have anything to say, leave me a snake emoji for 9th house. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram, and my Patreon if you want to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.